On the evening of April 1st, 2012, a man named Won-chun was returning to his rented apartment after work in Suwon, South Korea. He finished some leftover pork for dinner and poured himself a glass of liquor. After a few drinks, he was slightly intoxicated. Won-chun peeled a tangerine, watched some TV, then got up to go outside to smoke and take out the trash. Whether due to the effects of alcohol or a sudden impulse, a dark thought arose in his mind. He decided to hide behind an electrical pole in front of his building, waiting for women walking alone to pass by. About 20 minutes later, around 10:30 p.m., 28-year-old Kim was walking from the nearby train station. She worked at a mobile phone manufacturing company about 0.6 miles from her home. The buses had stopped running by then, and taking a taxi home would cost around $2. This wasn't a large amount, and her company provided a $100 transportation allowance. But Kim always tried to save this money to give to her younger brother as pocket money. Kim's family burdens were heavy. Not only did she have to shoulder her father's debt, but she also had to care for her mother and support her younger brother's dream of attending university. With her meager salary, she had to carefully budget every dollar, trying to provide for her family. But fate did not seem to be on her side on this fateful night. She was only about 1,300 feet from home when a dark figure suddenly appeared. Won-chun, like a predatory animal, leaped out from behind the electrical pole. In an instant, he had grabbed Kim by the throat and dragged her into his rented apartment. Entering the room, Kim felt as if she had fallen into a nightmare. The space was dirty, almost empty, emitting a strong, sour odor. Scattered everywhere were mysterious small cards, the meaning of which she dared not think about. The strangest and most frightening thing was the presence of many sanitary napkins on the floor, although there were no signs of any other woman's presence in the apartment. A suitcase in the room revealed clothes and underwear, some of which were carelessly thrown on the bed. He said he was willing to pay for sex with Kim, offering a price 10 times the rent. But Kim did not respond. She understood that she could not reason with this man, and could only try to escape as quickly as possible. She tried to circle around Won-chun to run to the door but was grabbed by him and thrown to the ground, then dragged into the bedroom and tossed onto the bed. After forcibly removing her clothes, he began to assault her. But Kim's strong resistance made it difficult for him to achieve his goal. At this point, Won-chun felt the need to urinate, so he had to temporarily let go of her and get up to go to the bathroom. The bathroom was in front of the bedroom, and to escape, one would have to pass through it. Therefore, he left the bathroom door open, urinating while keeping an eye on the bedroom. In her panic, Kim quickly changed her thinking strategy. With lightning-fast movement, she rushed to the bedroom door and locked it tight. With trembling hands, she hurriedly took out her phone and dialed 112 to call the police. When the call connected, she repeatedly said she was being raped and described her approximate location. But instead of immediately dispatching police, the operator kept asking Kim if she was sure she was being raped. How did she know the perpetrator? How did she get into the house and they asked her to provide her exact location? While Kim was trying to answer, a loud noise rang out. Won-chun had broken down the door. In her final moment of desperation, Kim begged, apologized, and admitted fault, hoping to calm her attacker's rage. The phone was flung into a corner of the room, and the operator's final words rang out meaninglessly. "Hello, please repeat the address." Afterwards, only Kim's cries of pain and the sound of Won-chun tearing her clothes could be heard through the phone. That evening, because Kim hadn't returned home and couldn't be contacted, her family reported her missing to the police. Therefore, it wasn't until 3 a.m. on April 2nd that the police began a search and rescue operation. Initially, only 2 patrol cars and 5 officers came to the area where the incident occurred. Kim's older sister also went along. The police car carrying her stopped in front of a supermarket, and she and the officers sat in the car waiting, listening to the radio communications of the investigation team. Later, these 2 officers even dozed off in the car. It wasn't until after the criminal was caught that they realized they had been only 30 feet away from the crime scene at that time. The slow response from the police continued. It wasn't until 6 a.m. that the number of officers increased to 10. and it wasn't until 6:50 a.m. that all 35 members of the investigation team were fully present. The peak of the delay was that the chief detective in charge of this case didn't leisurely arrive at the scene until 9 a.m. On the other hand, although Won-chun had tried many times due to Kim's strong resistance, he still couldn't achieve his goal. Finally, he just held her and slept for a while. At 5 a.m., he woke up, saw that Kim was so frightened she hadn't dared to close her eyes all night, and he began to act aggressively again. But she continued to resist with all her might. At this point, Won-chun felt angry and ashamed, thinking about how he had kidnapped this woman, gone through all of this, and still couldn't get what he wanted. So, he went to the kitchen, took a wrench from under the sink, then returned to the bedroom and struck Kim hard on the head. Not long after, blood began to soak through the bedsheet onto the mattress. He wrapped Kim up and dragged her into the bathroom, lit a cigarette, thinking about what to do next. But unexpectedly, her body began to convulse and shake. Won-chun immediately returned to the bedroom, took a scarf, and tightened it around her neck until he was sure she was dead. The notable thing is, hadn't the police already started searching? In such a long period of time, why hadn't they found Kim? According to later media reports, out of 137 households within a 1,000-foot radius of the crime scene that night, 133 said they didn't know the police had conducted a search late at night. It turned out that the police had directly eliminated houses that had turned off their lights, only tiptoeing to the doors of houses that still had lights on, pressing their ears against the doors to listen for any sounds. It's hard to imagine, in such an urgent situation, shouldn't they have knocked on each door to search? The South Korean police later explained, because it was late at night, they didn't want to disturb residents, and searching each house was indeed difficult. While South Korean law clearly states that when life and property face danger, to prevent unexpected incidents or help victims that cannot be avoided, reasonable judgment can be made to enter other people's land, buildings, or vehicles. Thus, from the time Kim was kidnapped until she was killed, she had to endure 6 hours of desperation with ultimately no chance of survival. At 9:30 a.m., the police knocked on the door of a paint shop just 15 feet away from Won-chun's residence. They showed a photo of Kim and asked the shop owner, "This woman has gone missing. Did you hear any fighting or strange noises around here last night?" The shop owner then recalled, "Around 10:30 to 11 p.m. last night, 2 of my friends were playing Go in the shop while I was drinking soju at the door. Suddenly I heard a woman screaming. I thought someone was fighting, so I stood up to look outside, but I didn't see anyone. So I walked about 4 steps towards the sound and heard a metal door slamming shut, with a woman's voice inside apologizing, shouting, 'I'm sorry, please help me.' I thought it was just a couple arguing, so I didn't pay any more attention." Based on the information from the paint shop owner, the police stood before a dirty metal door. The place looked like a warehouse. They knocked, but no one answered. Entering beyond the metal door, the windows of the room looked like they had started to mold. The situation inside could be clearly seen through the windows. A horrifying scene unfolded before their eyes. Won-chun was calmly watching pornography, smoking while using a knife to dismember a body. When they saw this scene, the police quickly broke down the door and arrested him. By this time, the victim had been cut into hundreds of pieces from the neck down, placed in at least 14 plastic bags. Some plastic bags had already been put into the washing machine by him. The extent of damage to the body was so severe that the police had to mobilize 14 forensic experts, while normally murder cases only require 2 to 3 experts. But in such a severely damaged state, they also couldn't check whether the victim had been raped or not. On April 4th, at a press conference about this case, the police said they felt very sorry about this outcome. They had tried their best, sending 35 officers to search all night and caught the perpetrator within 13 hours. But unfortunately, they still couldn't save Kim's life. Although they had received the victim's emergency call, the call only lasted 15 seconds, didn't describe the perpetrator, didn't provide an address, and didn't even give her name. The victim only told the operator she was being beaten. Therefore, this call was meaningless to the police. But if that was the case, why didn't they release the recording of this call? Whether it would have been helpful to the police or not, the public could judge for themselves. The case began to spread. Faced with public questioning, the South Korean police were forced to declare again on April 5th that the actual duration of the call was 1 minute and 20 seconds. We can listen to this recording.
112 경찰입니다. 말씀하세요.
네, 여기 목골놀이터 전에 집인데요. 저 지금 성폭행 당하고 있거든요.
목골놀이터요?
네, 목골놀이터 전에 집인데 어느 집인지 모르겠어요.
지동이요?
네, 지동초등학교 좀 지나서 목골놀이터 가는 길쯤으로요.
선생님 핸드폰으로 위치 조회 한 번만 해볼게요.
네.
저기요, 지금 성폭행 당하신다고요? 성폭행 당하고 계신다고요?
네네.
자세한 위치 모르겠어요?
지동초등학교에서 목골놀이터 가기 전에요.
지동초등학교에서
목골놀이터 가기 전요.
누가 그러는 거예요?
어떤 아저씨요. 아저씨 빨리요. 빨리요.
누가 어떻게 알아요?
모르는 아저씨예요.
문은 어떻게 하고 들어갔어요?
저 지금 잠갔어요.
문 잠갔어요?
내가 잠깐 아저씨가 나간 사이에 문 잠갔어요.
들어갈 때 다시 한 번만 알려줄래요?
잘못했어요. 아저씨 잘못했어요.
여보세요, 주소 다시 한 번만 알려주세요.
From this call, it's not difficult to realize that although in a dangerous situation, Kim still managed to control her fear, trying to calmly repeat her location. However, this operator mechanically and stupidly asked questions that the victim absolutely could not answer in that situation. According to disclosure, this operator had only been assigned here 2 months earlier. His training time at the police training center was even less than 2 weeks. When the sound of the door being broken down rang out on the phone, Kim's nightmare began. However, in such a critical situation, she was still smart enough to pretend to hang up and throw the phone aside, hoping the police could locate her through the signal. Therefore, this call didn't just last 1 minute and 20 seconds, but 7 minutes and 36 seconds, more than 5 times longer than the previously announced duration. The South Korean police explained, the remaining 6 minutes were mainly Kim's painful cries and pleas, which on one hand had no practical significance, and on the other hand was also to consider the feelings of the victim's family. But Kim's family had completely lost trust in the police. They demanded that the police provide the full recording of the call. If the first minute or so of the call with Kim made people feel anxious and helpless, the next 6 minutes would make people completely outraged. In South Korea, after receiving a 112 emergency call, they assign a code from 0 to 4 depending on the urgency, then automatically transfer the information to the nearest police station. The operator didn't know how to handle it, so they had 20 officers at the police station near the incident listen to this emergency call together. This police station was only a 7-minute drive from the crime scene. In the last 6 minutes of this call, there weren't just Kim's screams and pleas as the police said, but also the sound of officers talking to each other. They talked casually, not even muting themselves, and didn't consider what the criminal would do to the victim if he discovered this call. During the violence, Won-chun's voice could be heard. One officer said to another, "I think they know each other. Isn't this just a couple arguing?" Then another officer said lazily, "No one is answering, let's just hang up." And so the emergency call that could have saved a life was carelessly terminated by them. Besides lying about the emergency call, in fact, on April 2nd when conducting the search, the police had confirmed that the surveillance camera at the back gate of Jidong Elementary School had recorded Won-chun dragging the victim. The video was 13 seconds long, but until before releasing the images on April 9th, they continuously denied the existence of this surveillance video. Later, the police explained that because they had caught the suspect early, they didn't pay special attention to the video. This case had too many loopholes. From the time Kim was kidnapped until she was killed, she lost many opportunities that could have saved her life. First, because Kim had provided quite detailed approximate location information, the 112 operator had actually calculated a smaller search range. Looking back later, this analysis report was very accurate. They had narrowed down the number of households at the crime scene to 65. This means that if there were only 33 officers, each person only needed to be responsible for searching 2 buildings, the crime could have been stopped at an early stage. But this report was overlooked by the newly appointed team leader, who maintained the original vague order, causing the investigation scope to expand to over 3,000 households. Second, if the operator had been more professionally trained, they could have guided the victim to provide more valuable clues based on the situation, such as how many floors the building had, what the perpetrator looked like, whether he had a beard. Such specific dialogues would have been more helpful in locating the victim and later apprehending the criminal. Moreover, in dangerous situations, most police advise never to hang up the phone before they arrive. Although Kim didn't receive this reminder from the operator, she was smart enough to do so. Because the police can not only receive information from the victim's words, but can also find important clues from the surrounding environmental sounds. However, in this case, the police irresponsibly hung up the distress call first. The irresponsible operator, witnesses making subjective judgments, and the police searching passively all seem to push Kim step by step into an irredeemable abyss. After the incident, the motive for this case also caused controversy. Won-chun was born in 1970 in the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region, China. Before coming to South Korea in 2007, he lived by farming and doing temporary jobs. He had come to South Korea to work 3 times and had a wife and children in China. From May 2010, he started working in Seokdong, Suwon. The single room he lived in had a monthly rent of about $150. Won-chun drank alcohol every day and sought prostitution services once a month. After borrowing high-interest loans locally because he couldn't repay the debts, he was often beaten and scolded. Therefore, he was very obsessed with money. When working in South Korea, he didn't get along with colleagues also because he couldn't participate in the social drinking culture after work, which is an important part of Korean office culture. His life goal was to bring the money earned in South Korea back to his hometown to live. The reason Won-chun killed Kim was firstly because he was extremely angry that she had resisted when he tried to rape her, and secondly because he was afraid of losing the $7,000 he had earned in South Korea because of this incident. At that time, he remembered scenes from American gangster movies he had watched, and to avoid being caught by the police, he tried his best to dispose of the body. However, the victim's family and public opinion have raised doubts about this. As Won-chun said, the murder and body disposal were all to cover up the crime as quickly as possible, so the issue of time was extremely important. But his method of committing the crime showed a terrifyingly calm demeanor. He spent 6 hours cutting the victim into more than 200 pieces, but didn't damage the internal organs. Moreover, he was 5 feet 9 inches tall and weighed 183 pounds, and in the situation where Kim was tied up, stopping the rape and killing her was also difficult to understand from a psychological perspective. Therefore, the court put forward the hypothesis of organ trafficking. However, in the trial, the Suwon court believed that Won-chun was simply putting the body in plastic bags for preservation, and his bank account didn't have any suspicious money transactions. Therefore, after comprehensive analysis, they believed he just temporarily used these cruel methods according to the situation. Due to the change in the assessment of the motive, Won-chun's sentence was reduced from the death penalty in the first trial to life imprisonment in the appeal. The difference lay in the intention regarding the disposal of the body. However, some critics argue that for Won-chun, who had attempted to rape women and dismember the victim, committing such an extremely cruel crime but being exempted from the death penalty, whether this is really appropriate or not. In a media interview after this case, a chief detective declared that finding the victim in just 13 hours was already very fast, and even if they had found her earlier, she might have already been dead. Such a cold statement further enraged the South Korean public. Afterwards, this chief was disciplined with a 3-month suspension from duty. Under strong public pressure, the police chief also submitted his resignation. In his statement, he said, "I can only express my deepest condolences to the victim's family and hope they forgive us. I blame myself for the South Korean police's careless work leading to this tragedy. I also apologize for disappointing the public when the police tried to cover up their irresponsible behavior. Additionally, he stated that he would severely punish those involved and hold them accountable. If the victim's family wanted to sue for compensation from the state, he would also do his best to support them. On the evening of June 28, 1993, two students from the University of the Philippines Los Baños campus, Eileen Sarmenta and Allan Gomez, were enjoying some relaxation time after classes at a cafe near campus. Sarmenta, a 21-year-old agriculture major, was preparing for her final months before graduation. Gomez, 2 years younger than Sarmenta, was a close friend of hers. They often spent time together playing chess, cards, and sharing interesting stories about life on campus. As night fell, the two decided to return to their dormitories. Gomez was driving his white Toyota pickup truck with Sarmenta in the passenger seat. Just as they opened the car doors, an ambulance suddenly appeared. 7 men rushed over. 2 armed men restrained Gomez, while 2 others grabbed Sarmenta. In an instant, both students were dragged into the back of the pickup truck, helpless against the sudden and organized attack. The assailants then drove off in Gomez's truck, following the ambulance away from the shopping center. The shopping center, usually bustling and safe, had become the scene of a brazen kidnapping that no security camera had captured. The only evidence that something terrible had occurred was perhaps Gomez's wallet that had fallen out of his pocket as he struggled. Sarmenta and Gomez's mouths were gagged and their hands tied behind their backs, leaving them silent in utter terror. The 2 young students, accustomed only to the peaceful campus environment, now faced a situation beyond their wildest imaginations. As it turned out, behind this kidnapping was a carefully prepared plan. The perpetrator's aim was not a typical abduction, but to gift the mayor a particularly desirable present. Before arriving at the shopping center, they had searched the entire school for Sarmenta. When they couldn't find her there, they moved on to the shopping center, a popular spot for students, and finally located their target. Meanwhile, Sarmenta and Gomez were completely unaware that they were about to face the most horrific hours of their lives. After half an hour of driving in fear and uncertainty, the vehicle finally came to a stop. The doors of the truck bed swung open, and Sarmenta was roughly pulled out. Her eyes stung as they adjusted to the bright light after the long period of darkness. In front of her was a large iron gate. This appeared to be a vast and isolated private ranch. From the main entrance of the ranch, a man emerged. Unlike the 7 kidnappers, this man exuded authority in his gait and attire. The pristine white tennis shirt he wore symbolized his status and power. This was Antonio Sanchez, the owner of this ranch. This ranch served as both Sanchez's refuge from power struggles and the place where 2 innocent students' lives would end. Antonio Sanchez was born on May 10, 1946. His political career began as the vice mayor of Calauan from 1972 to 1980. In 1986, he was appointed mayor, but this term was quickly cut short due to government restructuring under President Corazon Aquino. However, this interruption was only temporary. On February 2, 1988, Sanchez regained power. Sanchez was known not only for his political position, but also for his eccentric personality and obsession with appearance. He spent considerable time and effort on plastic surgery and hair care. His distinctive hairstyle, often compared to a mop, became a subject of ridicule among the public. However, these mockeries seemed to have little effect on the absolute power he wielded. There were rumors that he had his own armed force and was involved in running an illegal gambling crime syndicate, during which time he had amassed considerable illicit wealth. Besides abusing his power for personal gain, his lifestyle was also heavily criticized. In a national television interview, he brazenly admitted to having many girlfriends and mistresses, showing complete disregard for his wife standing beside him. He also frequently expressed his love for the Virgin Mary on television and often appeared at charity events. In the summer of 1993, a seemingly harmless meeting became the beginning of a horrific tragedy. As a reporter for the newly established school newspaper, Sarmenta had interviewed Antonio Sanchez. During that interview, his eyes were drawn to Sarmenta's youthful beauty, and a dark intention began to form in his mind. On that fateful night, when Sarmenta was dragged before him, Sanchez's face was filled with terrifying satisfaction. His eyes glanced over Gomez, and in a cold tone, he asked about the identity of the young student. One of the accomplices hurriedly explained, "Sorry, boss, they were together. We had to bring him along to avoid trouble." Sanchez merely nodded. Without hesitation, he grabbed Sarmenta's arm, pulled her into the ranch house, and slammed the door shut. In the hours that followed, Sanchez's ranch house became a living hell. While Sarmenta endured unimaginable brutality from Sanchez, Gomez's fate was no less tragic. Gomez was pushed into a separate restroom where the kidnappers were relaxing and watching TV. 4 of them, perhaps out of boredom and cruelty, began to take turns torturing him. To them, this 19-year-old student was just a witness who needed to be eliminated. In extreme pain and fear, Gomez curled up like a child on the cold floor. He tried to protect his head with his hands, but that couldn't stop the brutality of his attackers. One of them, with particular cruelty, used the butt of his gun to strike Gomez's chest hard. This horrific scene continued until Gomez's body was bloody and covered in injuries, lying motionless on the floor. Only then did his tormentors stop, continuing to watch TV as if nothing had happened. Around 1 a.m. on June 29th, Sanchez finally ended his violent act. Sarmenta, her face covered in tears, hands tightly bound, hair disheveled, white shorts torn, left with only her underwear, couldn't control her sobbing. Sanchez wore nothing but his white tennis shirt. He thanked the kidnappers for bringing him this special gift and told them, "I'm done with her. Now you can do whatever you want with her." When asked about what to do with Gomez, they promised him they would kill him to silence him. Afterward, these men stuffed the 2 students into Gomez's pickup truck, and the ambulance and truck left the ranch one after another. On the way, from the ambulance cabin, they could see the truck in front swaying back and forth, perhaps because Gomez had regained consciousness and was struggling along with Sarmenta in the truck, or it was the sound of others trying to control them. Then a gunshot rang out, and the truck stopped. A man dragged the blood-soaked Gomez out of the truck, threw him onto the roadside, and fired another shot into his head to ensure he was dead. Then the convoy continued moving forward. Witnessing all of this, Sarmenta was completely shocked. She was alone and helpless, not daring to imagine what other violent acts she would have to face. The vehicles stopped at a sugarcane field. These men, like their boss, began to take turns raping Sarmenta. She was pinned down in the truck bed with someone holding her arms and legs tightly. She cried uncontrollably, in pain, and constantly begging. After everything was over, when she saw one of them pull out a gun, Sarmenta sensed something was wrong. She struggled to prop herself up, kneeling in the truck and begging, saying that her body and dignity had been taken, pleading for them to spare her life. But the man was completely unmoved. They stuffed a dirty rag into her mouth, preventing her from speaking further. Then they pulled the trigger, aiming at the beautiful mole on Sarmenta's face. And so, this young female student was discarded in the truck like a useless object. These men didn't even bother to erase their traces. They returned to the ambulance and left, all the way recalling the crime they had just committed and mocking Sarmenta's final plea for mercy. At 6:30 a.m. on June 29th, Deputy Police Chief George, along with 4 other officers, Aurelio, Luis, Vicencio, and Zoilo, participated in a special operation to search for a drug dealer. They had no leads on the drug dealer's whereabouts, so they could only drive around aimlessly, hoping to catch someone by chance. When the patrol car reached a remote road, they saw what appeared to be a person on the roadside grass. Upon closer inspection, they discovered Gomez's body. The young student had been shot twice, once in the head and once in the back, in a brutal murder. Almost simultaneously, another police officer reported finding Sarmenta's body in a nearby pickup truck. They immediately went to the sugarcane field and then drove the truck back to the police station. As soon as the bodies were discovered, the police quickly notified Sarmenta and Gomez's families and friends. In fact, worrying signs had appeared the night before. Sarmenta's roommate, feeling concerned when she didn't return to the dormitory, had reported this to the manager. For those who knew Sarmenta, this behavior was completely out of character. She was a well-behaved, gentle, and responsible student. Her overnight absence without prior notice was entirely unusual. The police notification finally confirmed the roommate's bad premonition. Sarmenta's body was unbearable to look at. Her t-shirt was pulled up to her shoulders, she wasn't wearing pants, and she still had on the white sneakers she loved. Her mouth was stuffed with a dirty rag, and there were cigarette burn marks on her body. The investigation revealed that Gomez had been shot from a distance of about 1 to 2 feet, while Sarmenta had been shot at point-blank range in the face. The forensic doctor also discovered that although Sarmenta had been dead for several hours, there was still a lot of fluid coming out. Combined with the degree of tearing and injury, it could be confirmed that she had been brutally raped before her death. The horrific nature of the case quickly drew the attention of the National Bureau of Investigation of the Philippines. Recognizing the importance and urgency of the matter, they immediately sent staff to Calauan to expedite the investigation. Police Chief Carno, based on the different levels of harm suffered by Sarmenta and Gomez, believed that the main target of this criminal group was Sarmenta, and Gomez was just a collateral victim, killed because he happened to be with Sarmenta. However, Deputy Chief George had a different opinion. He believed that Gomez was the perpetrator. He argued that Gomez liked Sarmenta, but Sarmenta already had a boyfriend and rejected his feelings. Gomez harbored resentment because of this. George said he had investigated the case. Not long before the incident, Gomez's ex-girlfriend had been dumped by her boyfriend named Kit. As a result, Gomez had fought with Kit on campus, but because he lost the fight, he took out all his frustrations on Sarmenta, who had not accepted his feelings. George further analyzed that. On the 28th, Gomez had pretended to make amends and invited Sarmenta for coffee after class. After everyone else had left, he offered to drive her back to the dormitory, then drove to a deserted area in the sugarcane field to rape her. Finally, he used a gun to kill Sarmenta. Afterwards, he became afraid of being caught by the police, and the more he thought about it, the more panicked he became, so he ended it all. However, George's argument had many holes. First, where did the different fluids on Sarmenta's body come from? Second, the blunt force injuries on Gomez's body couldn't be explained either. And no weapon was found where he died, so how could he have hidden the weapon after death? On the 29th, near where Gomez's body was found, residents discovered an empty shell casing. They later handed this shell casing over to the police. On the 30th, Officer Aurelio, who had discovered Gomez's body along with George, reported a new situation. On the 29th, after transferring Gomez's body from the police station to the city hall, he had seen a prisoner in uniform washing the Toyota pickup truck. This prisoner said he had been instructed by his superiors to wash the car, but didn't specify who. Aurelio also gave Police Chief Carno a pair of white shorts, saying they were found by the mayor's driver on the highway far from the sugarcane field, possibly belonging to Sarmenta. But then, Aurelio suddenly disappeared. In 1993, the Philippines had not yet used DNA techniques in murder investigations, so the police couldn't determine whose fluids were on Sarmenta's body. But through analysis of the bullet trajectory from the empty shell casing found, they discovered it belonged to a Colt .45 pistol used by police, and this gun was registered under Officer Luis's name. The metal fragments left on Sarmenta's face also matched the scratches on the empty shell casing. This indicated that the gun that killed Sarmenta was indeed this gun. Luis was one of the officers who participated with the deputy chief in the operation to catch the drug dealer, and was also the one who discovered Gomez's body. And now his gun had become the murder weapon. After the 29th, Luis did not retrieve the gun he had submitted to the police station, so the suspicion that he was involved in the case was very strong. A few days later, Luis and his brother Rogelio, accompanied by Antonio Sanchez, came to the police station to surrender. Rogelio was the one who had discovered Sarmenta's body. The two brothers admitted that they had killed these two students, but it was all under someone else's orders. So who was that person? In Deputy Chief George's argument, wasn't it Kit, the boyfriend of Gomez's ex-girlfriend, who had a conflict with Gomez? Yes, he was the one who planned this case, Kit's father was a general with a bad reputation, and he had a conflict with Gomez, so he indeed had a motive to harm him. But after the police found Kit, they learned that after fighting with Gomez, the two had reconciled. And classmates who knew both of them also confirmed that they had no further conflicts afterwards. The National Bureau of Investigation and Chief Carno completely disbelieved the testimony of these two brothers. Even if Kit and Gomez had a conflict, it wouldn't go to the extent of using his father's influence to tell two police officers to rape Sarmenta and kill two students. The chief persisted with his own reasoning and ordered the torture of the two police officers. Unexpectedly, very soon after, they implicated Sanchez. The investigation revealed that Sanchez indeed had shown many strange connections in this case. His private ranch was not far from where the bodies were discovered, and his driver had picked up Sarmenta's shorts on the highway far from the scene. Moreover, he had accompanied the two police officers to surrender. All of these were too coincidental. Very soon after, the National Bureau of Investigation investigators also discovered that Sanchez had previously contacted Sarmenta in an interview for the school newspaper. Faced with questions from the National Bureau of Investigation, Sanchez initially said he couldn't remember where he was on June 28th. Then he said that after taking his child to school, he went to his mistress's house. He had dinner there and then went to San Pablo Church, returning to his mistress's house at 10 p.m. The next day, he also stayed there for breakfast and lunch. When asked if he suspected anyone, he unhesitatingly named Kit. This hasty blame-shifting seemed very suspicious, as he pointed to the same person along with the two suspected police officers. By August 10th, the missing Aurelio was found in a large market in Manila and arrested by National Bureau of Investigation investigators. Subsequently, Deputy Chief George, Officers Vicencio and Zoilo were also summoned. Fearing torture, Aurelio confessed first, followed by Vicencio. On August 13th, Sanchez was also arrested. Aurelio and Vicencio's testimonies were as follows. On June 28th, to help Antonio Sanchez find the gift he had ordered, Deputy Chief George and Aurelio drove an ambulance to pick up officers Vicencio, Zoilo, and Luis. Aurelio was the driver. They drove out of Calauan, stopping a few times along the way. Around 7 p.m., Luis told them to turn back. They picked up Rogelio and Kawit at the Calauan gas station. It was only then that Luis revealed to everyone the true purpose of the action, and even boasted that the gift for the mayor, Sarmenta, would make them drool because of her beauty. Then the brutal acts we described earlier occurred. Among these, Aurelio and Vicencio did not participate in beating Gomez, nor did they participate in raping Sarmenta. However, only their testimonies and no other evidence were available to prove this. Aurelio also testified that, after committing the crime, when Sanchez learned that the National Bureau of Investigation had sent people to monitor the case, he became furiously angry, blaming everyone for acting thoughtlessly. But then he said that just a sum of money not enough to buy a new car could settle this matter, telling them not to worry. On June 30th, hearing from colleagues that residents had seen a suspicious ambulance near where the bodies were dumped, Sanchez gave Aurelio 2,000 pesos, about $40 at the time, telling him to find somewhere to lay low for a while. Clearly, the so-called operation to catch a drug dealer was just a fake search to disguise the discovery of the victims' bodies. Later, the police dug up Sarmenta's belt that she had worn before her death and cigarette butts used to burn her at Sanchez's ranch. When the trial began, Aurelio and Vicencio were not prosecuted. All others pleaded not guilty. Sanchez, each time he appeared in court, brought a statue of the Virgin Mary, wore a glaringly white tennis shirt with his surgically altered face, arrogantly declaring that he could not have raped Sarmenta because, with his charm, all women came to him willingly. The others said they had only confessed under torture. The brothers Luis and Rogelio said they were acting under the orders of Chief Carno, only naming Antonio Sanchez as the mastermind, but claiming that Kit was the actual perpetrator. Deputy Chief George also testified that it was Chief Carno who ordered the prisoner to wash the pickup truck and destroy evidence, and he told them to blame this on Vicencio. On March 11th, 1995, after 16 long months of trial, the court rejected the defendant's pleas. Sanchez and 5 others were all convicted of murder, rape, and kidnapping, each receiving 7 life sentences to be served consecutively. Additionally, the judge pointed out that the cruel behavior of these individuals was rarely seen in the world, and they were ordered to compensate the families of Sarmenta and Gomez a total of 12 million pesos, about $240,000 at the time. Upon hearing the sentence, the calm image of this mayor suddenly disappeared. He flew into a rage, cursing vehemently, showing a completely different face from his usual demeanor. That same year, Sanchez was also indicted in another political murder case. Luis Vicencio and 2 others had carried out an assassination plan under Sanchez's orders. As a witness granted immunity from prosecution, Vicencio pleaded guilty in court. In December 1996, these 4 people were convicted of murder. Sanchez and Luis received 2 additional life sentences. Many years later, Sanchez still adamantly proclaimed his innocence, saying that all of this was due to political framing when he was running for governor. Time passed, and by 2019, 26 years after Sarmenta and Gomez were murdered, their families could never forget those horrific memories. And now news emerged that enraged the victims' families and the entire Filipino public. According to a law enacted in 2013, stipulating that prisoners who showed good behavior during their sentence could have their sentences reduced, Sanchez and 11,000 other prisoners would be released early. Very quickly, a petition with over 53,000 signatures was posted online, with people earnestly requesting that Sanchez serve all of his sentences. On August 22nd, students and alumni from Sarmenta and Gomez's university organized a rally to protest Sanchez's early release. The victims' families also strongly condemned the authorities' special treatment of the murderer. In fact, Sanchez was not a model prisoner in jail. On the contrary, he frequently violated regulations. In 2006, during a surprise inspection at the prison, guards found prohibited items and tools in his cell. He was charged for this, but the case was dismissed in 2011 due to insufficient specific evidence. In July 2010, he was again caught hiding prohibited items worth 1.5 million pesos, about $30,000 at the time. These were hidden inside a statue of the Virgin Mary in his cell. In November 2015, during another surprise inspection, a window air conditioner and a tablet were discovered in Sanchez's cell. He lived comfortably, justifying that due to health reasons, these were all necessary items for him. On August 26, 2019, under intense public outrage, the incumbent president of the Philippines was forced to personally intervene, ordering the Minister of Justice to suspend this plan, and finally, after a week, refused Sanchez's early release. The director of the Bureau of Corrections was also forced to resign. On March 27, 2021, Sanchez was found dead in his cell by the prison guards. He was 75 years old, and that's the story for today. Thank you for your support and see you in the next videos.